What does learning catalytic listening make possible, and for whom? What does it make possible to listen for someone's strengths and outcomes and values, and to learn to reflect that back? And what does that make possible, and for whom? Let's start with the for whom's. There's obviously the participants in the class.
Mm-hmm.
What does it make possible for them? What does it make possible maybe for you guys who are also in the class as co-instructors? Who else might it make something possible for?
Every single person that either of those two groups would be talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Talking and listening to, any person.
Yep, the ripples. Ripples. Ripple. Which is also those ripples and their ripples and their ripples are creating the future's mission.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for us, since our role is to ask the questions that help transform the world, listening carefully means we can ask just the right question that that person is ready to hear at that moment in time. That will draw to help them to the next stage in their in thinking through whatever it is they've been telling us about and we've been listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and what does that make possible for that person?
They feel respected.
Mm.
They don't feel judged.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't feel judged, what do they feel?
Listen.
Appreciation.
Welcomed.
Trey, what did you say?
Appreciation.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you said welcome, Jane? Yeah.
I think they feel strength because the shift is from I need to go outside to ask an expert to, oh, I have this within myself to see what I want, where I want to move forward, or what change I want to see, what good will look like. And that's in my control.
Which builds confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What does catalytic listening make possible?
Helps people identify by your reflection, helps them identify strengths they sometimes don't know they have in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the wisdom that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that make possible for them?
They may see a path opening in front of them that they didn't know was there, leading to a better future.
They have hope.
What else?
The word that comes up for me is presence.
Give me more.
It's about giving attention to the moment,
Mm-hmm.
to what's happening right in front of you. It draws you in a way that is safe and it's being seen and being heard at a deeper level, and seeing and hearing at a deeper level.
And what does that make possible? And for whom?
Feeling fully alive.
Mm.
Ooh. Okay.
Connected.
What was that?
Connected.
Connected.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And feeling fully alive means that maybe you have the energy to actually walk the path or choose a fork or in the path.
Mm-hmm.
Where you may have before felt, if you feel hopeless, you also feel without the energy to do anything.
Wow.
Situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think they can, it gives the space for someone to see what those first steps look like on that path, where it's not this huge, hairy thing. It's a doable, actionable step I can take right now to aim for what I want.
I think it creates a shift in perception of self. And this sort of echoes some of the other comments before. When reflected back to the person speaking, when the listener reflects back a lens of positivity, that it changes how people perceive themselves. And I am, and I know I'm in some ways repeating some of the things that were said before, but I'm just trying to think of how one feels when, oh, you really do love X, whatever it is, not the opposite of X. You really do want this. You really do want that. Oh, that's who I am. I'm the person who wants all of those. I now begin feeling very different about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So and Jane, along the line of approaching the life with confidence, I approach it with confidence because I see myself in a very different way now.
Mm-hmm.
And the listening back is so steeped with honoring that person. No different than when we introduce somebody in the room, we're honoring them about why we're excited they're there. And that same kind of feeling is rippled in the ongoing conversations we have with people with catalytic listening.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The one thing I'm missing from what we're talking about is empathy, because it gives the person listening a chance to feel empathy. It gives the person receiving it, that it shows our caring. They feel compassion from us.
I'm struggling to find words, but it's it is a consistent framework for putting empathy and compassion into action. And so what that makes possible for the asker, for the listener, is so empowering, when how often from a place of empathy and compassion we say and do the wrong thing, the thing that triggers people feeling bad, and we're coming from completely a beautiful place, and yet we're giving them advice and telling them what to do because we're feeling that empathy and compassion. And there's something here about coming from what you said, Jane.
When you combine it with respect,
Mm-hmm.
it's the I alone, as you say, it can go wrong. But if you combine empathy with respect and acknowledgement of their wisdom, then it shouldn't ever go wrong.
So it is a practice that transforms the listener.
Mm-hmm.
Practice that you do on a regular basis. It begins to transform you who are asking the questions.
The asker listener. Wow. Wow.
And the listener will feel a lot of the same things we said about the person you're having the conversation with. You will feel confident. You will feel strength.
Right.
You will feel honored.
And you will have practiced something that you will be even better at next time.
You guys have, oh God, my head's exploding already. We're 10 minutes in. Let's talk about it transforming the asker and the asker / listener. We started out by the person who is receiving the questions and receiving the listening. But now we're moving towards the person who is, in essence, going to be the participant in the class who is learning this framework. You said, Dimitri, that it transforms them. What does it transform them to? What does it make possible for them?
It makes possible a change in their lens, how they look at the world. And it changes how they see not only themselves, but how they see everyone else around them.
And what does it change it to?
It changes it to optimistic, positive, nurturing. The comment that Jane just made, respectful, gay, and moves it outside of self toward the people they're listening to. It isn't about them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's a way to get out of being the expert without telling yourself, stop being the expert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A transformative practice, because you can tell yourself that when it's really in the doing it that it becomes more and more real, or ingrained in.
It's part of the inability to perform a negative. When people, I'm watching somebody in particular, somebody in my brain right now that I'm thinking about, who I'm watching move through the ahas of, quote, trying not to be the expert. And you can't aim at a knot. And this provides the what to do versus the what not to do. This is, there's something in it being a practice. It's not the practice itself, but there's something about it being a practice that I think makes something possible, aside from the practice itself. And I'm not being very articulate, and I apologize for that, but I'm trusting you guys to help them.
In the what to do, you are shifting into where you're holding the space for new thoughts to emerge versus being out there with your megaphone telling it's creating a whole new dynamic of new thoughts and assumptions, because you've also changed your assumptions about self in the equation.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very generous practice.
Mm-hmm.
And where that's coming from, as you guys were talking about the joy that the person asking and listening gets, I was thinking about the quote that I had put into Pollyanna from Robert Thurman, where he basically talks about the fact that we get great joy in giving because it signals to us that we have something to give. And this is something we get to give to other people, which is the aha of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like a gift, that there's a giving in this. But it's a giving by asking for them. It's a weird, I don't know, I'm not being very articulate, but there's something really that feels very giving and generous, and therefore we feel good because we've given something that makes somebody happy.
They give back to you at that point, because that is that. And what I'm thinking is, when I go up to somebody and out of the blue I say, "Thank you so much for doing your shitty, crappy job that you have to do every day." I mean, I don't tell them that. Thank you so much for being the sample lady at Costco. I know it's hard standing on your feet all day. And they pause for a minute and they turn and they smile, and they really don't know what to say, but they're giving me something back, which is sort of like a sense of surprise and a sense of joy, and a sense of being acknowledged. And that is actually something they're giving back at that point.
We're soaking in their good energy. Like it's just a continual loop. It's not so much you say something and it falls flat and the person discards it, but the aha then recharges you in the listener, like continually fueling you, I think.
I love how much we're talking about energy. I love how much we're talking about energy.
Oh, a word that comes up. I have two words actually that come up. The first one is significance.
Okay.
Just speaking to what you were commenting about, Hildy and Dimitri, about that sense of someone begins to see, whether it's the receiver or whether it's the giver, seeing the significance of the person, seeing the significance of the moment. And then with that, the other word that I wrote down here was renewal. You know, to be renewed, to see things new again or different, or at the very least better or more than what they were before in just a few moments before.
Seeing things anew. Yeah, the ahas. That's the thing that we find so often with these, right? When we're listening like this is the ahas. And maybe that's part of what gives us so much energy is we help somebody create their own ahas, and that's like the gift they give back to us is the going, ah!
Total tangent. I wish this discussion had existed back when I was studying psychology at university. Because when I think about the therapy methods I was hearing about, that were all, tell me what happened when you were a small child that made you angry at your father forever. Everything seemed to be designed to make the person being counseled more depressed and upset and remind them of things they'd forgotten that they were angry about. So little of it was future focused. That I'm thinking as I listen, this is actually a counseling method.
It is. And that's what, as I'm listening to all of this, I'm thinking, because those of you who I've been meeting with in other meetings know that in my counseling internship, I've been infusing, I can't not. It's who I am. I can't help but infuse this into, and it does touch on motivational interviewing. There are practices that certainly have some similarities, and of course those are ones I tend to be drawn on to and try to integrate. But I'm thinking, when I first went into this and I observed sessions and I thought, oh, can I sit and listen to people's problems all day? This is going to get really depressing.
It can.
It can. But I'm thinking about yesterday, meeting with three different people, helping them look at what is it your life will look like? What does good look like? What is it your life will look like when it's good? What are those pieces? Here are the big pieces that we've identified together. What's it going to take for you to get there? And I'm not the expert in the room. And what multiple people have told me is I walked in here feeling afraid I was going to be judged for the choices I've made. And instead, I feel heard and accepted. And I didn't know we were going to be talking about how to make things better. I thought we were going to be rehashing all of the yucky stuff I've been through. And it's like, well, if you want to talk about some of that at some point, this is yours. This isn't about me. This is about you, and how can I help you reach for that person that you want to be, that you see the potential in yourself to be. So it does, listening for, just naturally listening for their strengths, so that I can affirm those strengths, listening to the things that they value.
I'm just thinking that's a whole audience for this course.
Oh,
It's anybody that does any kind of counseling
yeah.
would
Yeah,
benefit.
absolutely. Absolutely. So even though I'm not drawing listening buckets on the paper, those are the things I'm listening for.
Of course.
Because you have been transformed from your years of hanging around this group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But and so all the things we're talking about, how people feel from that place of being respected and honored and accepted and lifted up and feeling confident that they have and capable that they have strengths to build on has the potential to be life transforming. We all know that. But I'm now seeing that every day on a person-to-person level. Are they fixed? Well, no, I've met with them twice, and that's not my job. My job is to help them figure out their path.
I think it's an ongoing opportunity for the listener, asker, to also make it explicit to that person, normalizing kind of, here's why it always sucks when we go, like when we ask for advice, and also here's why you're feeling so good here. So it's on part of our mission to make it very explicit to people real time why we feel different in this conversation.
Yeah, and that's a great point.
For the listener to feel, I have the knowledge and confidence to deconstruct real time to someone, because it's not like, oh, I just feel really good when I'm in the session with you. It's like, no. You can also take that goodness out into whatever conversation you might show up on the phone when your mom calls you tomorrow night.
Right.
Let's talk about the advice piece. Because that's where we go when we're feeling compassionate to somebody, we're feeling like we care and we want to help. What is different about this than our wanting to help others? What is this enabling for somebody who wants to help other people and is coming from that pure place of compassion? What is this making? What is this? In part, I'm thinking just at a very, very core level, and it's coming from the negative, and we can reframe it, but it is the ongoing frustration of giving advice. It's alleviating that frustration of, how many times have you guys all heard me say the if you didn't want my advice, why'd you ask for it? Which we have all thought many times in our lives.
And counselors know that the advice is usually not taken.
Right.
I mean, I've done some projects with our women's shelter, and the abused women come back about 3 times on average before they get up enough nerve to leave on a longer basis from the abusive situation. So, of course, the counselors desperately are giving them advice to do anything but go back to the spouse who beat them up. And they're not listening because they haven't been asked the right questions. Maybe that's the time for that, what's the best that could happen kind of question.
Thinking even
it's just really depressing for the people that work in that field.
Right.
All these negative conversations where people go against your advice. It's got to be more life-fulfilling and satisfying.
Rebecca, and then
the questions.
I was thinking in immersion how powerful it was where you walked us through the dance of advice. So I think when we can very much all feel like, oh my gosh, yes, that's how the conversation always goes when it's in the advice department. So it really normalizes from that place of, this is how we've always been operating from a good place, but here's why it blows up. So
I don't think I've seen the dance.
This is being recorded.
publicly.
To me, this is very much about, we're talking about the wisdom being in the room or the wisdom being in the person. The difference between wanting desperately to provide a fix that they can apply that will help them versus helping them uncover within themselves what they have to bring. So if I assume that the person sitting in front of me or the group that I'm meeting with has that within them already, how do I help them bring it out? And to me, that's what catalytic listening does.
Mm-hmm.
Is it's so empowering because it helps people find within themselves. And I know that's a very social work, person and environment kind of approach, but it is. I mean, that's why these pieces all work together really well for me, because they're all about building on people's strengths, recognizing the capabilities that people have within themselves, and how do we find ways to help shine that light within them so that they can see it too and be able to use those values and strengths that they have to create the outcomes they want. If I truly believe that as I'm looking at that person, I don't feel like giving them advice because it's not about me.
And we recognize the strengths in them.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And you
And
don't want to diminish that or squelch that. The whole process is about bringing that out.
I have a question, Lisa, because this is an area that I struggle with, and you will appreciate this. As a parent, what is the practice to separate yourself from your child enough to not see them as a child, but as this human being with all this potential, so that you don't want to give them advice because you believe they have it within them, as opposed to wanting to protect them. I want to, or being frustrated that they're just doing something stupid. And I'm just sort of thinking about this right now because, yes, as a parent, it becomes very clearly defined. But I think also, as you know people over a long time, it's sort of like social work. I can walk in and I believe and not know anything about someone and be very effective. As soon as I know a lot about them, I go drinking with them, or if I do, it becomes a lot harder to have that step back. So I think maybe part of the practice of this is being able to have a reflexive response to that, as opposed to an emotional response to that.
And so what learning it makes possible is that it is a practice, not a perfect.
Yes.
And that it becomes more reflexive, where it is, our first knee jerk, and whether it is because we've never learned culturally another way, or because that's the way humans are, I don't know. But to have a practice that kicks in. I want to quote the ever brilliant Troy Alford, who I'm not even sure at what point in what meeting he said this. I don't think it was during one of the classes. I think it was during the web stuff. But he said, when we give people advice, we rob them of their journey.
Yes.
It's just so beautiful, and Troy's just so beautiful.
Yep.
Thank you, Trey, for Troy.
Yeah, and that just pops in my mind every time.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. So
Yeah, he's a beautiful man.
Yes, but that whole sense that what we give them is their, so in the positive, when we bring out their wisdom, we are helping open the door to the next step of their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can't help but think, Jane, you brought up the domestic violence example. And one of the participants in the beta runs a domestic violence organization. And we were, every session after the first session, when they come back, we obviously do awesomes, but the next thing we ask is, what did you practice last week? And the beauty of having this be week after week after week is they've got a week to practice things in their daily lives, and sometimes it's with their kids, and sometimes it's at work. And Iffy runs a shelter, and she it was part of a very long story, every part of which was just one of the things you'll experience as you ask this question of the participants in your classes is going to be that there's going to be some people in the class who will say, here's what I practiced. And there's going to be just as many people who are going to say, I didn't practice anything this week. I just asked this question. And you go, oh my God, you watch for it explode. I mean, it's just beautiful. And that was what this was. I didn't really practice this week. I just asked during our staff meeting, what evidence have you seen? What is it this week that you experienced that reconnected you to our purpose as an organization? And which is such a beautiful question. One of the counselors said that she had had a connection by phone in their hotline with someone who was experiencing abuse, experiencing violence in her home. And what the counselor said is, okay, if you feel threatened, here are some things to just keep in mind to keep yourself safe. So it wasn't get out of the, it wasn't, you should leave him. It was, if you feel threatened, here are some things. And so for instance, make sure you're not in the kitchen because that's where all the weapons are. And they can be used against you. Make sure that whatever room you're in, you know where the exits are, and hopefully have your back to one of them and can get out. Position yourself in a way that, and so it was all of these things that if you find yourself, here are some things that will help keep you safe. And that it had been several months since she had spoken to this person, but the person showed up at the shelter. And it was very specifically, she said, and again, it's a practice, it's thinking it. You can't imagine how many times this woman must have thought those thoughts to herself over these months, practicing it in her head. And when she came to the shelter, she said, you totally saved my life. All I kept thinking is, get out of the kitchen, stay away from the kitchen, where are the doors? And I put myself in a room that had 3 doors and that I could get out. And just, first of all, the story is just so powerful, and especially from the fact that if he said, I didn't practice anything this week, I just asked this question, he never would have heard that from the counselor in her organization. But the fact that we get to practice that thinking, and you know that this woman practiced that, you know that she thought that because you can't hear something and 3 months later go, oh yeah, I'm just going to dig that up. You know how many times that when she was in the kitchen, she thought to herself, oh my God, this is where the weapons are. And so there's just this power in noticing. So many of the things, Trey, that you've been talking about so far this afternoon is about noticing the noticing when we give advice. Just that what it makes possible when we take the step of noticing oh shit, that person's reacting really badly and I just did that. Not, why are they being such an asshole? And that's, to me, that's a huge piece of the practice.
Yeah.
Is understanding, and that's part of the dance. And I will turn the, I'm making myself a note, Jane, to turn the workbook pages on the dance of advice into an article.
Gee, do you think it could be Catalytic Thinking in Action article?
I don't know, Madam Editor. Might it be? You so gently coerced that out of me.
I think the power of noticing is, it's huge about all of the catalytic thinking framework, from even a woman in one of the community projects has really been thinking about what is possible when we bring our whole person into the room. So she has been consciously practicing not saying her job title, but she even was aware, and she was so upset because she then did it in a meeting I was in, not from like, oh, I know you scold me, but she was so pleased. And that's like that noticing of, I know how I feel when I now say my job title, because I also know explicitly what it does to people to marginalize them or only make it very narrow about your job. So in general, the whole noticing spans the entire curriculum as that awareness, because it is that lifelong practicing of practices.
It is so interesting that you said that. I'm thinking about the interactions where, due to communication habits, and that's all they are, it's just habits. I always say it this way. I always say this thing in this way, which we get from our parents. You know, we learn to communicate from our parents, and so many of our communication patterns are our parents' patterns. That wind up in that horrible trap that we call miscommunication. And when we call it miscommunication, usually internally we're blaming the other person. This gives us back our power to change those dynamics, to stop habitual, and I'm seeing this like in long-term relationships. You know, where you just get into patterns of talking and you know, you always and you never, and those kinds of things that happen in relationships 5 to 10 to 20 years. And this stops that.
Mm-hmm.
By the mindfulness of it. Lisa, could you talk a little bit? You shared when you first moved to Madison that you, in part, used not just asking people for their story, but a lot of pieces of catalytic listening in getting to know people. Can you just share a little bit of what that was like and what that made possible for you? And I see Justin's trying to join us, so I'm glad you're here, Justin.
Right. So you're testing me now.
No, I'm sorry.
No, we just want to listen to you.
Sure.
I will advise you not to feel that way at all.
It just sort of reinforces what all of you have been saying already, which is it removes so much judgment from the conversation, mm-hmm. and allows each person to share very honestly, values what each person brings to the conversation. And so in listening that way, about different organizations in Madison, what they were doing, what they were trying to accomplish in the community, it really allowed me to sort of get rid of any negative thoughts that might enter and really just focus on the values and the strengths that they were bringing to the community. and shift their thinking around that way too. Because I think the couple of the conversations I had, it was like, oh, we're trying to do this, but we're not as successful as we'd like to be. But yet refocusing on what they were accomplishing and the values that I saw just screaming through what they were saying, it was just fantastic for shaping those conversations.
Yeah. Justin, are you there? Okay. In the hope that Justin will appear, what you mentioned, Lisa, reminded me of an exercise that Justin did with a group.
Sounds like he's calling in.
He's trying. I want us to remember when he comes on is why I'm telling you this. He did an exercise with a group around catalytic listening. And you guys may remember he shared this with the Facebook group or with the fellows, I don't remember where basically the result was the people who were doing the listening found it almost impossible to go down the rabbit hole with people. And you know, I will wait until he tells the story, but that it so what that makes possible, how often we get sucked into going down there, and when we feel like, God, you know, how did I get it? We started out talking about this, and I'm usually a positive person. How did I get sucked into this conversation? Again, it sort of gives us that escape hatch.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Hi, Justin.
I'm in transit, so well, I think, Hildy, if I capture what you were saying, I think you hit it on the nose. It sounds like people were talking about the catalytic listening, and yeah, I've actually done it a couple of times now where I just have them, the context is I pair them up and I say, I want one of you to rant about something that drives you crazy for a minute, and I tell the other person, okay, I want you to just try and listen for everything that seems to be important to them, what they're aspiring to, what they seem to really care about, what seems to matter for them, and kind of if they indicate what it is that they have, just write that down. And people seem to really dig it. And the nice thing that I've been hearing is, you know, people said, well, I've done these, you know, active listening exercises, and they said, but I still always feel like I get caught up, particularly when they're drama-laden conversations. And so it just was really amazing to hear how it can cut through the drama and help prevent you as the listener from feeding that drama cycle.
Yeah.
Well, where we are in the conversation, Justin, and so your arrival is perfect, is talking about what catalytic listening, what learning catalytic listening makes possible for the participants, for the person asking and listening, for the person who's receiving the asking and listening. And your arrival came just at the time where I was thinking about the story that you told.
In Justin mentioning active listening, or I don't know if it's appreciative inquiry or whatever, any of the other things that are kind of out in the universe as named things, I think it's helpful to, as co-teachers in the curriculum, or to be able to talk about, yes, there are these other kind of more named things out in the universe, but here's why sometimes if you're using active listening, it still can get you back into the drama. So kind of normalizing and deconstructing if somebody has already learned another approach, kind of not in a, and here's why catalytic listening is better, but here's what catalytic listening's foundational core is all about, and that's why we don't end up in the drama recanting, here's all the bad stuff I heard from you. Like there's still a way to hear someone and hear for the strengths.
And it is a very appreciative way. It is a different lens of appreciative inquiry. really asking us to focus on those three components. And so by focusing in that way, it's the listening part as much as the inquiry part. So what I've found is active listening to me just makes me crazy. So it sounds like what you're saying is, yeah, that's because I just said that. Which has just always made me nuts. But and Trey, you may recall this, what became clear when we went through this exercise when we were first trying to figure out how to teach immersion. So way back in the initial time we all came together, and you guys had me role play what I was doing when I was on the phone with a client. And what we found was that the questions weren't that different than many of the questions that we would all ask as a consultant. Tell me about your budget. Tell me about your staff. Tell me more about your board. Whatever the question was, tell me what's going on. I mean, especially being as at the time we were just talking with groups of consultants, it was the kinds of things that any consultant would ask. What's going on? Tell me more about that. Who said what? How is that going? And what you guys found was that it wasn't what I was asking per se, it was what I was doing with what I heard. Mm-hmm. And that's the value of catalytic listening, is that even with appreciative inquiry, I love appreciative inquiry, and there are pieces of appreciative inquiry in so much of catalytic thinking. Frequent, and you brought up the issue that I'm faced with so often, Rebecca, that we all are, which is, oh, that sounds like this thing that they've heard of. And my answer is always, there's pieces of all of that in catalytic thinking, because catalytic thinking is not, we're not claiming we invented something.
Right.
We looked at everything that works and asked, why does it work? What are the components of this that make it work? The next thing off of the inquiry is, what do you do with what you hear? Mm-hmm. And that's such a big part of the power of, so when we're talking so much here about what the result is, it's really the reflected back piece that you guys are talking about has the power, because many of the questions that we might ask, with the exception of, so have you thought of doing the thing I think you should do? Yeah.
Combined with, why haven't you already tried? Like, wait, which is really the way to make people feel like fools. I know, because people keep saying that.
I always love Gail's, and we've so often put it on the wall of immersion after you had said it, probably during the first class, which is, a good question does not have the answer you want to hear embedded in it.
Yeah.
So what else does catalytic listening make possible? What will it make possible for you as the instructors teaching this class?
Well, actually, before you go there, Hildy, I wanted to reiterate one thing, just because it reminded me, I just had this happen 2 weeks ago, was when I did that exercise with catalytic listening, and I hadn't heard this response before, but I demoed it. I had someone rant, and I did the 1-minute drill, and I did it. And I went back the inquiry of, am I right? And then it sounds like this is important to you, or that this is, and the person said, not only was it nice to be heard, but it actually forced him to reflect on whether or not that's what he was actually saying. Like, he didn't even know he was saying that. So there was this tremendous aha of hearing someone ask you if this is what, saying, this is what I thought I heard, is that correct? He said it really forced that self-reflection component, which also broke him, who was the ranter, out of the drama and the it was there. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, Dimitri and I you guys have all experienced, so I have to share with you guys, it was pretty funny. We were in Delaware, and I just mentioned offhandedly, I don't remember what it was about, that Dimitri and I are very different from each other. And what was hysterical was watching Susan's, Jocelyn's, and Justin's faces all go, oh yeah, they are. Just as an aside, that was pretty funny.
I did not know that.
You did not know that.
You hadn't realized that before?
And it's so funny that Dimitri and I have very, very different ways of communicating and very different styles. And sometimes it's just so funny when I'll repeat back. It sounds like this is what you're saying. And he'll say, no, I wasn't thinking that at all. I'll say, but language. You know, I mean, Dimitri and I get to joke about it, and I get to say, but you said those words. Oh yeah, but I didn't mean those words. But it's really true that sometimes we really do. It is. We were talking a little bit before about how we use habitual language. We don't even know what we're saying half the time. We're just using phrases that we've always used, that we realized that our parents used. And I think you're right, Justin, in that it does bring, it does make us aware of the fact that, oh, when I say that, that has impact. And that's how it's being perceived. And do I really mean that? And I just say that all the time. But that's really powerful. I had never thought about that.
We act in such automatic ways in our lives. And also, we are very herd prone. That, you know, the herd moves in a particular direction. Hildy and I were having a conversation in Phoenix who spelled out, it's not really what I meant. So I think that that's another component, is the sort of social crowd moving in a particular direction, and you're kind of part of that.
So in part, we're talking about group culture as well.
Right.
Because frequently we're, some of us have the great good fortune of being able to be with groups and not just one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And when you're facilitating a group and or leading from the middle in any circumstance, the power of being able to focus on positive group attributes and take away from and diffuse negative attributes is so very powerful. And so that cultural, you know, herd mentality that you're talking about, that can so often be destructive, as it was with that group in Phoenix. The ability to stop that. I'm thinking, Nancy, of the example that we so often talk about, of you shifting conversation during a school board meeting.
Right.
By asking, is this the vision that we have? Is this what we, you know, this is.
Yep.
Let's move to you guys as instructors. What will teaching catalytic listening make possible for you guys?
More practice.
Absolutely.
As I was listening and sharing my own story about having it, using it, it struck me that one of the things that we're doing with the language and all this is challenging habitual behavior. And catalytic thinking really pushes against that. And not only catalytic listening, but I think the whole process of catalytic thinking causes you to challenge habitual behavior and habitual responses and assumptions. So in that way, practicing the catalytic listening is a very tangible way and a very powerful way to prime people to what can be different, how things can be different if you just open yourself up to doing it a little bit differently, thinking about it a little bit differently, framing the questions you are asking even in your head differently. So then it can sort of, help grease the wheels for something that may be more challenging for them to do if we're pushing up against a habit or an assumption.
Really interesting. Yeah, if you can change this small habit, you can change another habit. Which allows for the whole appreciative inquiry piece, which is you've accomplished something like this before, you can do this again.
Right.
What else will this make possible for you guys?
Give me back to this, Tony, I'm sorry.
Teaching catalytic listening.
Okay. I mean, I just didn't know which this we were talking about. So.
Gain skill and confidence.
In
the teaching process. Co-teach with new people, which is a wonderful opportunity to learn from each other and to learn together.
Learn from the participants, new situations, new ways of handling issues, the trends in their sector. Always learn more in workshops than they learn from me.
Yeah.
But you don't always want them to realize that.
I always want them to realize that. The interesting that you're talking about learning from the participants, Jane. The thought that's coming to my mind when you said that is we are not only co-instructors, but we are co-practitioners.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what popped for me when you said learn from the participants, that we're also participating in the classes. And every time, you can bet, because it happened in the 101 a lot. We all face it in teaching anything that we teach in this realm. But it's going to happen specifically in this class, is they're going to say, well, what do you do when somebody says,
right?
And that will be our practice. Do we come back and give advice at the point where they say, what do you do when somebody says? That's our practice.
Yes, I realize that we're practicing as well, and that just ingrains it better in our heads, makes it more internalized, more automatic. I really want that. To not have to always stop and say, don't give advice, bite tongue.
Well, and it celebrates that we're all human and being human, and it's not co-teachers. It's like we're side by side with everyone in the room. And I think last week when we were talking, Gail brought up the term of encourager as part of our role.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was really cool. Encourager rather than facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, so as a facilitator, if I've taught this and I get to sit back and let people do it, it's one less thing I have to do, and it's one more thing that I can just observe. And so they own it. They own that experience of listening and feeding back to each other. And I am, non-essential, which, when you're teaching a lot, it's nice to be non-essential every once in a while.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Every time I do a workshop and step back to watch them, it just gives me joy. They've
Mhm.
something. I created a space where
Yeah.
they were able to take ownership of what they were doing and run with it. And for a time, forget that there was any, paid facilitator at the front of the room and, people absorbing their wisdom. I mean, that's just crap. And it's lovely to get out of that and step to the back of the room and watch them teach each other.
I think the beauty in the room is there is no front of the room.
Mhm.
For catalytic thinking, there is no front.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
You're going to love this. I'm sitting here taking notes, listening to you, Jane. And what I'm thinking is, Susan Detweiler had this wonderful example. Honest to God, had no idea, Susan, that you had popped on. And I'm like looking down, taking notes, and I'm thinking to myself, I need to give the example that Susan had given of where her most joyful is when she's facilitating and she doesn't need to be there and the group is blah, 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 and they don't. And then Susan popped on. So hello, Susan.
Apologies for the delay. I gave blood and I fainted, so they kept me there for another 45
Oh no.
Oh no.
I'm fine. But actually I didn't faint. I just kind of said to myself, okay, I'm about to faint, I better tell them. And then they took care of me, and I am now filled with sugar and liquids.
Nice.
But I thought I'd catch the tail end and then watch it all later.
Oh, well, wonderful. We're so glad you're here. So glad you're here. So glad you didn't faint and hurt yourself. Yep, we are talking about what learning and teaching catalytic listening makes possible. And both for the person who's doing the asking and listening, the person who is going to be in the class learning to ask and listen, the people that they are asking and listening to. And what we were asking now is about us as co-instructors, what teaching and facilitating and encouraging and holding space for others to learn catalytic listening, being the instructors, what that will make possible for us. So that's where we're at right now. And Justin is here. He's in transit. So if you see him as a disembodied caricature over in the corner.
I was wondering about that. Yeah, there he is.
He is in transit. So
Aren't I always a disembodied caricature?
no, darling, you're frequently quite corporeal.
So what
What
have
else?
people come up with?
I'm sorry?
What have people come up with that it makes possible for the co-instructors?
What do you guys have? Well, what are you thinking it will make possible for you, Susan? Or are we putting you on the spot having just dove in here?
Joy.
Joy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I shared that with you a bit ago about what I finally discovered a while ago gives me joy is watching others be successful. And so if I am facilitating that and facilitating them being able to be successful on their own, that will give me joy.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nancy and Rebecca and Lisa, speak to that particular thing from the perspective of the classes that you taught.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think real time in the classroom, we were experiencing that with them. So that's kind of that energy and fueling cycle that's going on. And
Yes.
we were never in some expert teacher role. And then what they were sharing outside of the class, everyone was celebrating. Like, I just think of all the stories that are continually erupting, and we're all celebrating in it. And co-teachers are also sharing what we're working on this week and practicing the practice. So it's never like, hey, student, what are you doing on your homework? It's all about everyone's life. And and we're all, and I think that's when I think about what it also makes possible is the honoring of getting those stories heard beyond just the classroom. Because back to our initiative around, we want the stories of what it looks like when we bring out the best in people to be ubiquitous everywhere. Is this then is becoming that vehicle that as co-teachers, when we're hearing someone, to continue to push the story beyond what the cohort just shared real time there. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked, Hildy was talking early on about, I think Rebecca was too, about all the times that people say, I haven't practiced. I mean, we all had that experience of people saying, oh, I didn't practice. But I did have this conversation and I asked this question and everybody in the group is sitting there going, wow. That was just, all these wonderful things came out of it. And that was pure joy because they didn't think that they'd done anything. And yet they had this wonderful experience that changed relationships, that changed the focus of discussion, but they weren't doing anything.
Great.
And Nancy, that happened in virtually every class.
Yeah.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, that there was sort of personal moments of reflection around something that they thought was inconsequential, and ended up being the point.
Lisa, how about you? Moments of your own joy in the class?
I think for me, it was absolutely what the rest of you had said. But in terms of watching other people be successful, it was, you could see it in their faces when it hit. You're watching everyone just like we are now on Zoom, and you could just see this, like they go back in their chair like, oh my gosh, yes. And Mark Eckert just kind of comes to mind. There was some realization he had in the third session that was just sort of mind-blowing for him, but it was something that he was already successful at, and there was just one little tweak he needed to make in it, and this gave him the tool to do that. And just watching the joy on his face and then everyone else's faces when he shared with the group what he was going through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the joy, and I'm so glad that you brought up that word, Susan. For years since the very, very, very first immersion class, and in shorter classes when I'm doing an abbreviated version of this, I do the exercise where we model catalytic listening, what it looks like, and then I do the Columbo thing. I have just a few more questions, ma'am, and then I go into advice mode, and you watch the person shrink before us, and I do it for a very short period of time because you can watch that person is in absolute agony, that they've gone from that open space to the sometimes it being more obvious than others, and the ability to stop the action and to say, this is what we inadvertently do to each other. Mm-hmm. We are well-meaning. This is not because we're being assholes. We really are doing this from a place of deep caring, and this is what we do to each other all the time. And the joy for me is that opens the space up. That so opens the space up to, okay, there's so many layers of aha and so many, I don't want to be that anymore. And so much, yeah, that is one of my most joyful moments in 17 immersion classes. Is just watching the realization that just because we have good intention doesn't mean that the habitual patterns of communication that we have acquired are the most effective for disseminating that compassion that we have.
I would also suspect, having not done it yet, that when you're co-teaching or co-facilitating, there is also that experience of sharing with somebody else what you are learning in the process and being able to build on that. So you're sharing in the class and being able to build on that, but then when you debrief, you have colleagues with whom to debrief.
Yes.
That you're not alone. And I think that is one of the reasons why Jocelyn said that she doesn't do big projects for herself anymore. And I've learned that myself, to have other brains, other minds to talk about it with and rework it with and think through.
I want to add something to what you just said, Susan, and that is that in the years that we've consulted, there was a number of times when we worked on projects that were proprietary in one sense or another. And there would be someone involved in that project that was part of this team who, up until there was that team, had no one to talk to, not because there weren't other people who would be willing to listen, but because they couldn't explain what was going on. It was just, unless you had experienced it, the other person would not understand it, or there was a proprietary reason why you couldn't discuss it. So having a team gives you the opportunity, and I'm thinking about the safe space. You know, there's a safe space in the classroom, and someone reveals a personal, deep, important thing. Well, as part of honoring that safe space, if it's just you, you don't really talk about it to outside of this group. But if you have a fellow co-instructor, you have someone to reflect with on that and to talk about it, whatever. So.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just thinking about circumstances that go beyond just I'm alone, but there are artificial constraints or intended constraints that really would prevent you from being able to talk about it, even if you weren't alone. So,
use your words, Hildy. What your comments, Dimitri, just brought to mind is that what co-instructing this particular class makes possible, and having a cohort of teachers around you who are practicing this. One of the things we talked about, Susan, is that we're not just teaching, we're practicing. We're co-practitioners as well, which means we're being more mindful to practice catalytic listening in every circumstance, because that's what we're expected to be when we're teaching. And it makes us more just, I better sit up and listen to myself. I better be practicing myself more. And what that means is that we're surrounded by a cohort of a dozen people who we know are deeply practicing catalytic listening when we need it. And I will share with you guys the joy of being at wit's end about something that I couldn't ask myself the questions. I didn't even know what the questions to ask. To be able to pick up the phone, call Nancy, and to say, I need you. I need somebody who will, and Nancy asked me the most beautiful question: what questions have you been asking yourself? And I said, I have no questions. And the ability to know that there is a cohort here when we need somebody to ask us those questions who will listen from that place. There's huge power in that.
There is.
For all of us. And yeah, so that alone, that ripple. So it's not just having the co-instructor to talk about the class, but the fact that we know we have that for each other. That can't be understated. I'm grateful to all of you guys for that. Because you'll probably be next. And next time I fall apart. Well, I want to be mindful of time. It is 3 minutes to the hour. What is standing out for you guys in this conversation today?
I think what this conversation always tends to do, or this type of conversation, is to expand the focus, because I think sometimes when we're putting together a workshop or thinking about how we're going to train, maybe only thinking about the audience, we're possibly only thinking about ourselves. And what this allows us to do is think about what it's going to make possible for everyone involved. And it just makes it much more rich and brings a whole lot broader perspective to the planning. And intention to the planning.
Yeah, I had a conversation. You'll right along that line with somebody wanted me to do a keynote, and I asked them about the outcomes that they wanted from the conference, and they gave me a long list of all of the things that they wanted for themselves, for their organization. We want people to, which is so common. We want people to enjoy themselves enough that they'll register next year and blah, 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 blah. And the ability to ask, that's fabulous. And if they enjoy themselves that much, what will it make possible for them? What will be different for them at the end of the day? Very much to your point, Lisa, in terms of we don't even ask that, and we forget that because we're so used to getting into our own heads that they went, those are great questions. Yeah, so it does. It expands the focus, and you go, boom.
But in expanding it, we ended up with lists that have a very large overlap because there isn't that much difference between the co-facilitators, co-encouragers, and the participants.
We're all learning, all practicing.
It's really, I think it's great that we remind ourselves of that through intentionally separating the discussion and then combining back. And I will have to take off.
Well, thank you for being here, Jane, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
What else is standing out to you guys from the conversation?
Well, so I had, as we were going back to the catalytic listening, which was the only piece that I came up with one of my Justin analogies. I was thinking about in that listening relationship, if you think about baseball and a catcher and a pitcher, and so often we position ourselves, as the listener, we're the catcher. We're going to catch the balls. But then what we actually are doing is we're waiting for that other person to wind up, and then the catcher throws the ball back at the pitcher while they're trying to pitch. And imagine how startling that is when you're expecting to pitch and the catcher throws something at you. So sort of how often we play pitcher when we're supposed to be catcher. And it made me actually then, as people were just sharing now about thinking about the context of teaching, how often do we also have that same construct, which is we think of ourselves as a pitcher in that construct because we're throwing out the balls, forgetting that there's actually a tremendous power in being a catcher, even when, quote unquote, you're in charge. And for the baseball people, they know that the catcher is actually the most important person on the team.
So what position did you play, Justin?
None.
And when you think about it, the catcher is the only one who's looking at all the other players on the team. All the rest of the team. The catcher's the one that looks at all the rest of the team.
It's true.
That's great.
And everybody else is looking at the catcher.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
What else is standing out to you guys?
The big note that I had in the middle of all of my notes was about catalytic listening transforming both participants in the process. And we talk quite a bit about that, and that's so powerful when you can step out of the role of being an expert and use catalytic listening. The person you're listening to is not the only one that benefits.
Yeah. Rebecca, Trey, Susan, for your short time with us.
Just thinking of the power in noticing all the time. Just noticing, here's what's going on with myself, with the situation. When things go icky, that just even that notice is part of our practice.
Right.
And just also that the reflecting back is also the power.
I write a book called When Things Go Icky.
It'd probably be a big seller.
That actually probably would be a big seller if you were to like the dummies books. When things go icky about XYZ.
It'll be the corollary, Susan, to the workshop title we came up with this weekend. Your board sucks.
I tell you, yes, definitely.
Definitely a bestseller.
And the motto, the mascot will be a sheep.
Absolutely. Trey, what's standing out for you?
I'm not sure how to explain this one. Breathing easy. I was playing with the whole idea of embodiment, and embodiment can sound so big and so heavy, or just being who we are, and how sometimes when people are trying to wrap their heads around that, they talk about character development, developing your character, and not that those are inaccurate. They're really quite apt, actually, but they can feel heavy. And there isn't anything about this that's heavy. It's actually quite light. And so there's this sense of breathing easy through the process and just being in it and riding the waves of it. And it just feels rhythmic and comforting and exciting all at the same time. So that was just the thought that was coming to mind, because I know for myself, when I'm feeling off or not quite confident or vulnerable, there's this tendency to hold my breath. And so if I'm breathing easy, there's this sense of it just is, and it's okay, and it's all going to be all right, and we're all in it together, and it'll work out, and so before I opened my mouth, I said I wasn't sure if I could explain it, and then I wound up kind of explaining it, but that's the thought that was coming to me.
I knew you could.
Yeah.
Full faith you could. Dimitri, what's standing out to you?
Probably a couple of things. The more recent, if I'm going back in time, was when Justin made the baseball comment made me think of football instead. And what I thought about was the difference between football and soccer. That in football there is sort of a command control process. You know, the quarterback decide, you know, the play, and everybody has to do, you know, and in soccer it's more of a team effort that anyone can be the star at any moment, and they all interact with each other. And that's not to say that there aren't soccer stars, but the way the team works is different. And what that was playing off of was thinking about that this is part of a network. That in a network, the information goes in many different directions, has the potential to go in many different directions. And catalytic listening is sort of a network approach to things, in that it's not one way, it's not giving advice, and it is listening with an intent to return, but it builds upon itself. It's having a network effect, so it gets bigger because you're doing, and you gain from it as well. So that's
very cool. Very cool. And Susan, in your short time with us?
I wasn't here long enough to have any big reflections other than the fact that I mentioned the word joy and everybody was nodding, and then built on that told me that that was something that you all were thinking of as well, maybe not with that word, but to me that stood out to me very much. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Oh, yes. Well, we appreciate that you're here. So.
And not fainting on the floor of the day.
Yes, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, Susan, keep the blood donations down to 4 pints, you know, per time.
Wow.
You know, it had been 30 years since I had given, and the last time it had taken way too long. And I said, you know, it's been 30 years. My blood pressure's a little higher than it was then. You know, maybe I can do it this time. But no.
Yeah, I just make them lay me down. It's like, I'm going to pass out. I hate this. I'm going to pass out, so just lay me down.
That's actually what happened. I was sitting there and I was having my ginger ale and cookies, and said, I'm going to faint. That was it.
Yep. Sometimes that's it. The thing that really moved me during our conversation was the various numbers of times that we talked about energy, about it either being energizing, it's shifting energy, just the word energy came up a lot, and there's something so debilitating about the classic advice cycle, and it sucks the energy out, and both people feel bad, and this is the energy piece just really is standing out for me. So, and the fact and the wonderful reminder that we are all practicing, that we're all practitioners, that some of us may be practicing longer than others, as in us, quote, at the front of the room. The instructors will have been practicing longer than the people who are taking the class, but that we're all practicing. Practice, not a perfect. So, yeah. Well, thank you guys. And Rebecca, are we on for next week?
Every week, same time, same Zoom room.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah.
I will be sharing with you guys. The past couple of weeks has been so absolutely crazy, insane, and especially suddenly realizing that A, I was going to Delaware, and B, then that I was leaving earlier, and blah 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 blah.
Sorry about that.
No, and it was wonderful. And I got to play in the snow. But I have been playing with a schedule for our development of this that I will type up. Basically, I wanted to get set in my own head of, what is a good rhythm? What doesn't push us too hard? What doesn't say, we need to have a class in 3 weeks. Let's make sure this, and lose our mind days over it. What
Right.
puts us at a decent pace, and so I will get that to you guys as quickly as possible, because the development of the class, I don't know, it's just fun. It's just fun, and we'll enjoy it, and people are registering for the beta of the 102.
Good.
So, which is exciting, and we will just all see you guys next week. And we will be with Rebecca when
Yes.
Yay.
I know. We'll be sitting right where she is, only not on her bouncy ball. No,
Right.
We'll be in Boise. We'll be in your Boise food. So, all right, guys, thank you.
See y'all
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.